At noon, the tank on Commercial Street sighed. The workers below knew the sound. It had been making sounds for 4 years. Groans when they filled it, a drumming like machine gun fire deep in the steel. The men who worked beside it had learned to ignore what the tank was telling them, because the company already had. This is the story of the Great Boston Molasses Flood. The 21 people who died in the strangest disaster in American history. The man who tried to stop it, and the 8-word finding that changed what companies are allowed to build.
January 15th, 1919. Boston's North End, the most crowded neighborhood in the city. Italian families, Irish dock workers, city stables, a firehouse on the waterfront. Above it all stood the tank, 50 feet tall, 90 feet across, holding 2.3 million gallons of molasses, not for gingerbread. Molasses was industrial alcohol, and industrial alcohol was money. Rum before Prohibition arrived, and munitions during the war that had just ended. The tank belonged to United States Industrial Alcohol. It was the biggest thing in the neighborhood, and the neighborhood was never asked. 2 days earlier, Boston had been 2 degrees above zero. Today it was 40 and climbing, a January thaw. The day before, a ship had pumped in a fresh delivery, warmed so it would flow. The tank was nearly full. It had been filled to capacity only 8 times in its life. This was one of them. The tank was built in 1915, in a hurry. The man in charge, Arthur Gell, was the company's treasurer. He was not an engineer. He had never built anything. There was a way to test a tank like this. Fill it with water, all 50 feet, and watch the seams. Gell filled it with 6 inches. The steel itself was wrong. A modern engineering review found the walls were half as thick as standards required, even by the rules of 1915, and brittle, and riveted with flaws. None of that was visible from Commercial Street. What was visible was the leaking. Molasses wept from the seams from the beginning. Children came with cans and scraped it off the steel. Families in the North End knew the tank was leaking because they were eating the evidence. The company's answer was not to reinforce the tank. It was paint, brown paint, molasses-coloured, so the leaks would stop showing. One man refused to ignore it. Isaac Gonzalez worked at the tank. He saw the seams up close, and what he saw frightened him enough that he went to his bosses again and again to report the leaks. The auditor who later reviewed everything wrote it plainly. Witness after witness, most with nothing to gain, all testified to substantial leaks. The warnings were on the record. The record was ignored. Gonzalez even received a telephone call, an anonymous voice threatening to destroy the plant. The company would remember that call later, when it needed a story. Nothing changed. The tank kept groaning. The neighborhood kept living beside it. And on the warm afternoon of January 15th, the men from the paving yard next door sat down to lunch in its shadow, the way they did every day. For 21 people, this was the last normal day. noon. Firehouse 31 sat between the tank and the harbour. The crew had just come off a call. Bridget Cluckerty, 65, was at home across the street. Pasquale Iantosca and Maria D'Estasio, both 10 years old, were near the freight terminal, gathering firewood. And then the rivets began to let go. Witnesses said it sounded like a machine gun. Stop here. Look at what Commercial Street already knows, and what it doesn't. A tank tested with 6 inches of water, steel half the required thickness, 4 years of documented leaks painted brown, a warm snap, a fresh, warm delivery, pressure building from fermentation inside. Every cause of the next 90 seconds is already in place. and not one person on the street below has been told a single item on this list. At 12:30, the tank came apart all at once. 2.3 million gallons, 13,000 tons, hit Commercial Street as a wave 25 feet high, moving at 35 miles an hour, faster than anything on that street could run. The steel sides went with it. One section sheared the legs off the elevated railway. A train had passed moments before. The Cluckerty House was lifted off its foundation and broken against the trestle. Firehouse 31 was swept sideways, its first floor collapsing on the crew inside. Molasses is not water. It is a fluid that thins when it is moving violently and thickens when it stops. It crossed the street like a flood, and then it set around whatever it had caught, like a trap. The harder anything struggled, men, horses, birds pulled out of the air, the deeper it held. Within minutes, 116 Navy cadets from the training ship Nantucket were wading in waist deep, pulling people out of a hardening brown field strewn with wreckage. Police, Red Cross nurses and soldiers followed. They worked into the night. The search went on for 4 days. 21 people died. 150 were injured. The youngest victims were Pasquale and Maria, 10 every old. The oldest was Michael Sinnott, a messenger, 78. George Lay, a firefighter, died inside his own firehouse. Bridget Cluckerty died beneath her own home. The harbour ran brown until summer. The company had its story ready within days. Anarchists. A bomb. Hadn't there even been a telephone threat? 119 North End families sued. One of the first class actions in Massachusetts history. The court appointed an auditor to find the truth. Hugh Ogden, a colonel just back from the war. Ogden sat through 341 days of testimony across 3 years. Engineers, workers, widows. The company's experts blamed the imaginary bomb, and when it was over, Ogden's finding on the explosive theory ran 8 words. No bomb or high explosive, and no traces were discovered. The tank had simply been built wrong by a company that tested it with 6 inches of water and answered 4 years of warnings with brown paint. Ogden recommended $300,000. Facing a jury, the company paid $628,000, about $12 million today, roughly $7,000 for each of the dead. The families took the settlement. The company took down its story. Isaac Gonzalez had been right the entire time. Here is what the molasses changed. After Ogden's finding, Boston and then state after state rewrote the rules. Major structures would require plans stamped by licensed engineers and architects, filed and inspected before anything was built. The era of a treasurer building a 5-story tank on nerve and paint was over. Every certified blueprint in America carries a little of this verdict in it. The tank's footprint is a park now, a ball field at the edge of the harbour. On the Centennial, 100 years later, people stood in a circle where the walls had been and read the 21 names aloud. For decades, on hot days, residents swore the North End still smelled faintly of sugar. The paint, they never had to explain. Everyone already understood what it was for. The archive is open. Subscribe for the next case file.